Hello guys, and welcome to another video. In today's video we're going to be looking at Codeigniter routing. We'll look at the basics for routing today, and then in the next episode we'll look at some bit of advanced routing, where we look at the post, get, put, or essentially the resources class. I know it has taken a bit longer than I expected for this video to come out, but nonetheless we have the video out. So we will start by doing the basic routing, and then we'll look at other issues later. Now, so in the last episode we were looking at our project where we had the local host 8080, where we were able to set up the login page. Of course, we modified it a bit so that we can have the JavaScript that allows us to, play around with it. Now, in today's episode, we want to look at how do we, of course, I have how do we set up the routing essentially. Of course, in this case, you can tell that this is the default page for Codeigniter, and that I have my Apache server running, so all my services are up and running. I have my sample application here, which we have been working with. And to start with, we are going to have, if you recall, we had the home, which extended the base controller. We had the authentication, which we were using to, in the index, so one for processing the login, then one for homepage, at the same time one for registration. Now we're going to create another controller. But before we do that, we want to first configure something. So we want to ensure that we don't have the index.php prefix. So we will go to app.config app.php, and we will remove this where you have the public index page. We'll remove the index.php, so that this allows us to simply have the files or the paths running directly. When you're working with routing, you will want to have the app.config routes.php file open, because this is where we're going to be defining all our routes. It has been centralized. So in this case, like I mentioned, you go to your project folder, app, config, your routing, and we'll be looking at how do we create these routes, how do we make sure the routes are working efficiently. So to begin with, I will start by having creating a new controller. So I'll create a new controller, and the controller we're going to be creating is we're going to call it product manager. So we'll make an assumption that we have a file called product manager, not manager, and we will save it inside the controllers folder. Make sure the name is exactly the same way as has been defined in the class itself, because when you're on a Unix-based system, then this will become sensitive. Now, essentially, when you have a product manager, you can define different classes that are for products. So you can define a product class, then you can use the product class to reconfigure some items. In our case, however, we simply want to define a few routes just to start with, and therefore we will not be defining all the routes. Now remember, when you're in Codeigniter, when you're defining any route, you will have your URL. So for example, it's test.com/users/blog, /1, right? So you will have this particular sequence. Of course, if it's Codeigniter, you will have the index.php prefix first, then users, then blog, then 1, and the likes. So what we want to ensure is we want to make sure that we are defining these routes in a manner that we are able to display data without having to go to have an extensive route. Okay, or a URL becoming too long. Okay, so in essence, what we typically would do is that we'll have a number of functions inside the the controller. So we can say, for example, public function. We want to first do what in the controller. We want to be able to show maybe one item. Yeah, so show one product. And of course, if you want to show a product, then you will need to have a product ID. Okay. you could have a function to list all products, right? So here we can make an assumption that we want to have, for example, let's say if you're listing all the products, then we can have an array. So let's say products is an array, and sorry, we can have a few items in the array. So let's say we have a shirt, we have trousers, we have socks, we have shoes, we have caps. Okay, so we can use the same products list at the top. Of course, you can make it a class parameter, but then in our case, we simply just want to list it here. So when you go to list all products, then because you can show one product, you can list all products, we want to loop through. So we can say from I is 0, I is less than size of products. Then you want to simply have these items listed in a manner that you have products at index I. Of course, we want it to go to the next line, so we add a break tag. So that when someone calls the path list all products, then it will take you to this path. Then if they call show one product, they will either pass an ID. So you can check to see that, of course, the ID is not less than 0. So we can have the product ID is less than 0, or so let's just clean this up. Of course, you realize that the size of the products is, remember the indices, so this is in PHP, the indices start from index 0 all the way to index n minus 1. So this becomes index 0, index 1, index 2, index 3, index 4. When someone is listing the products, of course, they will pass maybe the ID 1 or the ID 2 or maybe the ID 3. Yeah. So in our case, then here we'd first want to have the size, which is going to be the size of the products, right? So here we'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're saying if the product is less than or equals to 0, so if the ID they've passed is less than or equals to 0, or whatever they've entered, product ID, ID is greater than or equals to, so the size of this is going to be, so if I enter 1, 2, 3, 4, so if I enter 6, so this will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you enter 6, then that becomes more. So in our case here we'll have +1, so we can simply say here is greater than or equals to size of, to size. Then we simply want to echo the statement, the ID entered is invalid. Otherwise, you want to echo products at that product ID index. All right, so this is what we want to list. So you want to enter the product. So if the person enters maybe -1 or 11, then it gives an invalid ID. If they enter, let's say 2, then 1, 2. So we expect to see trousers. Now, we'll define a route that is going to give us. So when you open routes at PHP, you are given some default routes, and the default one here is the routes get, which if you pass any get, remember when you're accessing the URL is typically a get request, and you have this redirects to the home.index. So with the routing, you have the keyword routes, which is an inbuilt instance from services. Then you have some bit of chaining where you're saying that you have the function get, and you have the URL that you're accessing here, and what controller it has been mapped to. All right, so we can define our own routes here. So we'll say routes. We can use add. So if someone adds the URL / products, okay, let's say slash show1, and they pass in any character. So we have some inbuilt array of items that are acceptable, so you can pass in and say you want to only constrain to integers. In fact, we can actually constrain this. You can decide to constrain this to maybe integers, which makes it numerical values. Yeah, so we can say if they pass a number and they call show1, then we're going to have this map to the product manager, right? And we will be specifically calling what function. So we'll use a full colon. What will be the function we're calling? Show1 product, and we will be passing a variable 1. Okay, so we're saying that if I call products show1 and I pass any value, then it's going to map it to product manager, show1 product, and that. So let's see if this will work. So let's start by having the products. So we'll say / products show1, we pass 1, and you can see it has already given you trousers, which is, if you look at the product manager, 0, 1. 1 is trousers. If I pass 0, you see that the ID entered is invalid. If I pass test, okay, you get an error. So the reason you're getting an error is because when you are constraining, you can see show1 test. When I'm constraining, you'll notice that here I'm considering this is only numerical. I can say it's any alphabetical character, so I can say it's alpha, which means that if I pass anything else other than an alphabetical character, then it becomes a problem. You can also constrain it and just leave it as any, which means that whatever you enter, be it alphanumerical or integers, then this is going to work. Then we can also have another second route. Remember, we said that in the first, in the product manager, we can list all products, right? So in this case, when you're listing all products, you don't have any parameter that you're passing, and therefore we can list all products. Okay, we will list all products here. We don't have any parameters we're passing, but we can say list. Okay, so products list. This should take us to list all products. So if I say list, you can see that it is listing all the items in that particular product list. So in essence, we can use this add to essentially constrain that we want to pass these values into a specific controller that we want to restrict or map or match. Okay. Now we can also use what we call closures. So we can use what we call closures, and in our case, what the kind of closures I want to use is where we are grouping the routes. So instead of having to show products, show1 products list every time, we can simply have the routes and we add the routes, then we group, because add is not for that, and we can say we want to group so that instead of having to say in the code that products show1 products list, the prefix is always going to be products. So I would say that whenever you get products, okay, remember this is a closure, we're going to have a function. Remember that for a function you normally have parentheses, an opening curly brace and a closing curly brace. And because we still want to have access to this, when you are working with closures, you will always pass any variable that you want to access within the closure. So inside the function, I'm going to pass the routes variable, which allows me to have access to the closure. Now I can simply just copy these two parts inside here and say that products, if I have products and I want to list, okay, or if I want products and I want to show one, and that, then we simply still leave the URL as is. All right, so if I go to the web page and reload, you'll see that this still remains. So if I go and say show one, let's say 3, then you can still see that it still shows the code. All right, so that's it for this episode. In the next episode, we'll be looking at how do we now convert this into, we look at closures, we look at redirections, we'll also look at the get post and file management, after which we'll then be able to now display values from these controllers, or from the routes and the controllers, either as Ajax or JSON, okay, as JSON or XML, and see how the two interrelate. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, please leave a like. If you enjoyed it, you can leave a comment. You can also subscribe, share with your friends, press the notification icon so that you can get notifications when a new video is up. It really helps with the algorithm. Until next time, enjoy your time, stay safe, mask up, and see you next time. Bye bye.